Hi everybody, welcome back. I had a little technical difficulty this morning with the camera, but I think it is fixed now. Let me make one little adjustment. Hold on, there we go. No, hold on, adjust it back there we go, perfect. Now I think we're ready. It was funny because I got on and I was like, what the fuck? I'm like, what's going on with all the equipment this morning? And I'm going to go a little bit into astrology just to bring it back around, but it's like Mercury's not retrograde, so what the hell? And I'm going to do a little bit of a myth buster about astrology, and we're going to bring it back around to consciousness. I don't have the chat up yet. I'll put it up in about 15 minutes. I like to get started a little bit first, set the energetics for the room, and then we can go into more questions and answers or whatever. Wherever we flow, we just kind of go there. We don't really get too bogged down on what it is. But, okay, so astrology. People will say, especially when you're really getting involved in your human types of stuff, that your astrology doesn't matter. Or when you're really in your human stuff, it kind of flips. So when you're really unconscious and you haven't started awakening at all, you really have no interest in astrology. So some people come in a little more conscious than other people do. So they're on a little bit different track. It doesn't mean they've started their ascension process. It just means they're a little more open to consciousness. They're on a little bit different frequency. And that's when you get into people who claim mediumship. And I say claim mediumship because it's really not what people think it is. You're just really reading energetics of things, like energetic imprints, but they're just really aspects of you or aspects of other people. They're not, which technically, even if it is an aspect of another person, if they're in your reality, they're still an aspect of you. So you're really just seeing kind of imprints of things. Because I remember years ago, I used to love to go on the ghost tours back when I was really into mediumship, which we all kind of go through that because you're just learning to listen to energy. But at the time, you kind of think it's something else, and we all like to feel special that we can do something, because as humans, we never really felt special. So we go into a lot of these things because it makes us feel special, right? It makes us feel like, oh, wow, I'm so good at this right now. Like, I know how to do all of this. So we kind of delve into stuff. And I remember at the time, I went on a ghost tour in New Orleans? No, it was Savannah. It was in Savannah. I think I went on one in New Orleans too, come to think about it. But this was Savannah. And the guy that was leading the tour had all this equipment, this ghost hunting equipment. And it was kind of funny because he had all this ghost hunting equipment. And I was like, I don't think I outed myself. I think somebody outed me. Someone I was with used to out me. Everyone used to love to go on any haunted place with me. Like anytime you think someone's a little more plugged in than you are, you want to take them on all your stuff, right? Anything Halloween haunted, everyone wants to take you on that. And someone outed me that I was, more in tune than maybe some other people. And he was like, well, what do you see? I was like, well, there's two things over there by the tree, and they were dressed, a boy and a girl, and they were dressed like this. And like later in the thing, he pulled up some picture that they had taken later in the tour. He pulled up a picture of these two, I guess they'd taken it with all the special cameras, of these two figures standing by the same tree, dressed in the old-timey garb, and it was a boy and a girl. And it was kind of funny because they needed all the equipment to do it, but we don't need the equipment to do it. We do when we're in our human form. In a sense, we're in our human consciousness, but we don't need it naturally. That's kind of a crutch a lot of us will use. They have all this equipment. You don't need all that equipment. But in a way, there's a lot of ways you can look at it. Because this ghost thing comes up a lot, and I wasn't going to talk about ghosts, but I guess I am. It's energy. Get off of the entity word. The entity gives it a different controlling power, and it's not. It's just energy. It's energy of something. It's imprint of something. It's different aspects of yourself. If you're looking at it for someone else, you're looking at different aspects of them, but they still will be a shade of you, or you couldn't really tune into it. It's kind of like empath. People say, oh, I'm an empath because I feel everybody's stuff. If you're feeling someone's stuff, it's your stuff. You can't feel someone else's. Their stuff triggers your stuff. That's why you feel it. So it's never just about everything else. When we're in our human states, it's about everything else and kind of it's a different energetics around it though. It's more of a blaming energy. Everyone else is responsible. Even when we start getting more conscious and we open up to all the energetics around us, we tend to misunderstand it and we give it more of a human label because that's what we've been conditioned to do. If we see something or hear something that's not exactly us, or we don't think it's us, then we think it's something supernatural. And it is supernatural, but more supernatural, our powers are supernatural to our human consciousness. But when you're really deeply, deeply unconscious, you really don't believe in any of that stuff. You don't even have the awareness of the energetics of other things. So some people come in just a little more in tune to different frequencies, but they're not embodying the frequencies. They're not what I would call conscious. I would not at the time call me super conscious when I was doing this, just more in tune. You're more in tune with the field. You're just calling it something else. But you don't need a lot of equipment to see any of these things. You don't need a lot of stuff. You just need to tune in to what you're looking at. It's not a magic trick. You're just tuning into your field and what's in your field. And then you can kind of get an idea of kind of what's going on. But it's all going to be some kind of reflection back of you too. And there's a zillion reasons why you see it. There's also, every dimension runs at the same time because there's no time. You can also see you're just seeing through the dimensions of where that is actually taking place. So in a way, I'm seeing energy imprints of something, aspects of me, aspects of different people around me, which is really still an aspect of me in some way, because these people are around me. You're also seeing what people would say past lives, but they're really not past lives. They're just energetically in a different frequency. They're in, if you believe in the multiverse, which, you know, people believe in the multiverse when it's comic books, but in real life, people think that's crazy shit. It's not crazy. It's the same thing. People just have an easier idea of looking at it than when it seems like it's make-believe. That's why a lot of these movies about multiverse are coming out now to start expanding people's minds about these concepts. It's not just for the movies, you know, it's not just for that. It's really about everything. It's not just about the movies. People get kind of like, oh, it's not just the movies. But people see that, but it's all meant to expand people out. That's really what it's meant for. So when you start talking about those types of things, you eventually have to kind of move out of it and you kind of understand, you see and hear and kind of feel everything, but it's not what you think it is. You're just kind of seeing through you're seeing another timeline taking place. And normally if you can see a different timeline, just like when people start getting into their past lives, because they see them as past, even though they're concurrent, it's not so much what they did in the past life, it's some energetic thread that's DNA activated going off now. There's some similarity in it. That's why you're getting a past life. That's why you want to know about a past life, or what you would deem as a past life. But it's really not a past life. I'm going to call it that for this because it's easier for people to understand that sometimes. But it's not really, it's just a concurrent life, just not of this frequency, not maybe of the frequency you're used to looking at. So you look at it and say, oh, you know, this is a past thing. It's not really a past thing. It's the now thing, you know. But people look at it a little bit differently. They see it a little bit differently. But it's just because there's an energetic signature in that's playing out now. There's some DNA marker that's causing you to want to look at that. Because something similar, the energetics are the same now as what it was in that frequency, in that multidimensional time. So you can look at it in different ways when you think about some of this stuff. Even astrology, which is originally what I was going to talk about. Astrology, when you're not conscious, you don't really think about it. When you're completely in your human realities, you don't really get into it. Part of waking up is getting into astrology. You're kind of into your sign. Maybe you were into your sign and astrology when you were younger and you kind of get out of it when you were older. You went a little bit more asleep. You got a little more disconnected because you got into more of a human consciousness conditioning life, different beliefs there. Because our beliefs set our reality. We believe it, and that sets the reality. If we believe something different, eventually it'll set a different reality. It's just we're so core into our human beliefs because they've been ingrained in us from it's been marketed to us for so long that this is what you should do. It's so strongly embedded into the collectives and the collectives we do connect up to, even if it's just in the cellular connection now. and you've cleared a lot of the energetic connection to it, you still might have a cellular connection to it. It's hard in the beginning. It's hard for our human to pull away from that because it's so ingrained in our body. That's why it takes many years. It's not just, I know I've thrown out 7 to 10 years, but that's if you're giving everything to it. You know, if you have a family you're raising, because that was a different contract, you're kind of finishing up that human experience, you're going to see it might take longer because you're in a different mindset with it. You're in a different space in your journey. It's probably a better word to say it than in a different mindset. You're in a different space. So you're not quite there yet. So you start opening up. I think I said last time, Reiki is sort of an energetic marker for people. Kind of, it's a key code. People want to learn about energy. Reiki comes up, even though it's an energy that eventually you will outgrow. And if your frequency gets higher than the frequency of Reiki, you have Reiki done on you and it just doesn't, you don't feel anything. Whereas you go and have different energetic work done on you. It really depends on the frequency of the person who's doing it and what they're able to bring through. If they're still doing regular Reiki, that's a higher frequency in a way than where they're currently holding, because they're still doing it. And then you get into different frequencies really in energy work, where like Usui Reiki is probably the base Reiki, and then you get into I can't remember them. Isn't that funny? I can't remember them, and I took all of them. And I can't remember any of them. I'm not even going to try, but there are different levels of energy work you can do, and each time you go into a different one, the frequency is a little bit higher, but eventually you tap out of all of them, and then it's just the frequency which you can bring through yourself, and the frequency you hold, and how high you can get when you're working on a person. But a lot of people won't be able to take those frequencies. So you become a little more, you practice a lot more discernment in who you do energetic work on, if you're really into doing energetic work and you're ascending your consciousness and you're embodying in that ascension, those ascension energies, and raising your body's field of consciousness, raising your body's frequency. Then you start to see it differently. And you understand that the vibration that you might bring through might be it's too high for a lot of people. And it could really kind of crash their life in a sense, because it will crash everything that's not that frequency. And if you're living at a frequency really beyond, not as a judgment beyond, but just in a different place than everybody else, it might not be responsible to do it unless it's really explained. And even if you're explaining it to a human, they might not understand what it could do. They kind of think it's a joke. It's for the best for them in a sense of what might collapse after those sessions or months after that session, but they might not see it that way because they're still holding on to their human timelines. So Reiki's a key code. Astrology also will start moving people into looking at something else as a human, day-to-day physical world, right? Start looking at other things. They start starting to see correlations between things happening in their life and things happening in astrology of the planet, right? In a micro level and on a macro level, you start to see different things coming through, different ways things change based on what's going on. Different countries were birthed at different times have different energetics about them. And the people born into those countries have a different DNA setting in a sense. They have different go-tos. They have different belief systems. It's not saying they're not corrupted belief systems in a sense, but they just have different belief systems. Like the United States is born under July 4th, right? That's the birthday. And that's in the sign of Cancer. So it's a very underdog sign. It's in a way, it's a very manipulative sign. And it's polarizing. How do I say this? When you look at each sign, they have the good, what you would label as the good, the positive and the negatives, which is polarity. We don't really talk that much about polarity here, but for now I'm going to use the words. But eventually, when you get high enough in consciousness, you do see where these signs can be purified and brought back in a different frequency. You're in a different frequency, so they come back in a different frequency, and they have gone through the distortions of the sign. But in its human sense, in its how a human would interpret it, there's good and bad. I don't like the words, but I'm gonna use them for now. Good and bad to each sign. They just purified at some point, and you start to look at the traits that are going to get you through your ascension process and why you were born into such a sign. And the same thing for what country you were born into. The United States energetics, if you're born into that country, is completely different than if you're born in Iran or Iraq. That's more of a hierarchy, patriarch. It's a different energetics, and you're gonna link up to a different collective. You're going to find yourself linking up to a different collective. It doesn't mean you don't eventually pull away from all those collectives, but you're going to find yourself, when different collectives go through certain things, you're going to feel a certain way. One of the signs of Cancer, and a big theme for the United States, is an underdog theme. Love an underdog. You know, you don't mess with, if anyone knows anyone that's born under that astrology sign of Cancer, you don't mess with them to an extent, because they do come back and bite you. And it's one of those signs that's kind of like a sleeping dog in a sense, but eventually they take their pinchers out. It's a mothering energy. It's a lot of different energetics to that sign. Some distorted, but there's still, every sign has distortions, but you work through those distortions as your frequency purifies, and you don't play in the distortions of your sign anymore. You pull on the strengths of those signs to help you through the ascension process. Right? You pull on those. So astrology takes on a different meaning, and you also understand it's not outside of you. You don't look at all the planets and go, oh, they're all outside of me. In certain levels of consciousness, they appear outside of you because you haven't expanded your consciousness yet to understand it's inside of you. Everything's inside of you. The whole solar system is inside of you. You still will be affected by different planetary alignments, but that's still coming from inside out, not outside in. But when you're in a level of consciousness that's here and all of that's out here, you haven't expanded enough to embody it yet. So it'll play out a little bit differently. It'll start playing out more of the distortions of what's going on in your life. Then when you start embodying those things, you really start taking energies on differently. You start understanding why they're coming through at different times. Anyone who's ever had their birth chart read, because they were into that. If you've ever been into astrology, you've probably been into having your birth chart read at some point. And when you start looking at different planets that come in and different timelines things come in, you start understanding different markers you had in your life. And that was different markers you had in your human template. You know, if Jupiter was in your, I'm not an astrologer, so I can't remember what house it is. There are certain times when partnerships are amplified. And if it's in that house, a lot of people got married that year in their human template, and they could start tracking different big things that happened in their life based on what planets were in different houses, right? And a lot of people say, oh, that all goes away when you get through ascension. I don't so much believe it goes away. I still think those energies will set years up for you. They're just in a different frequency. It's a different timeline. It's not the human timelines. You're resetting the timeline. The energetics are still going to be there. They're still going to have a marker for what you're going to be going through that year. You're just in a different timeline. You're in a different level of your game, in a sense. You're in a different space with it. So what might have been in your human existence, oh, I got married that year. When you're in a different timeline, it might be a different type of partnership that comes through that doesn't equate to a human partnership, a human agreement. Marriage is a human agreement. It's not a higher dimensional, higher frequency agreement. It's a human agreement. That's why you see a lot of people, they could be married for years and people will start leaving relationships, leaving marriages. And it has a sort of the connotation has changed over the years. And in a way, when certain things are done, a lot of people will go into different twin relationships, but they'll be married too and go, why are these energies coming in? I'm married. Well, your soul doesn't care about human contracts. It just does not give a shit about human contracts. It's more for the exploration and growth of your frequency and what you're supposed to be doing and what you're supposed to get out of it. And if you're not getting it out of it in that human contract, then you're going to find that over time, these human contracts go away because they're aligned with a different consciousness. Now, I will say aligned. And people will say, well, Annette, you say it was aligned, but I get into this really shitty experience. How can that be aligned on a soul level if it was shitty? Well, everything is going to be aligned to the frequency you're putting off, right? So you might have gotten into we're going to use the relationships for a minute, even though these energetics flow into every part of our lives. It's not just romantic relationships. It does seem to be something people gravitate to because everyone's had some experience in that at pretty much every age. Whereas if you're in a certain age, you might not have had a career boost yet, but usually romantic entanglements, everyone's had that in some way. So it's an easy thing to pull on, even though that's really not higher dimensional relationships either, in a sense. That's another discussion. So everything you attract is aligned in a certain level of consciousness. So when you get married and it felt like that was what you were supposed to do, in a way it was what you were supposed to do, it was aligned in that level of consciousness. It was aligned in a human consciousness. It was aligned in that frequency. Is it aligned in a higher frequency? That's where the human gets tripped up, where our human mind wants to dissect, why can't all this stuff continue? Why can't all this stuff come with me? Well, it can't come with you because it's not aligned in your new frequency, not in its current form. It doesn't mean it can't be shifted. But it takes two people to tango. It takes two people to shift to reality. One person to shift it and the other person to decide they want to go along with that shift. They can hold that frequency. They can go with the new guidelines, in a sense, of what that new relationship is going to be. So it's aligned in a frequency, but it might be an unconscious frequency. But it's still aligned. So when the more conscious we get, we might get a lot of things thrown at us because we still, in some way, even if it's on a cellular level, we're still putting out frequencies. Even if it's not maybe our main frequency we're putting out, it's underlying, it's still there. Why do we keep getting the same stuff back again? You know, if I'm trying to get out of a certain energetics, why do I keep getting people who are coming in and they don't want to give 100%, they want to give 10%, and I feel like I'm supposed to give 10% to keep all these relationships going? Why do I keep being put in these same energetics? Because on a cellular level, you're putting out those frequencies. You have to really look inside and go, okay, what in me is still wanting something from that? Because I'm still transmitting these frequencies. That's how things come to us. We're still transmitting different things out. That's why I'll see a lot of people who don't understand why they're not getting what they want, but they have a lot of different transmissions going on. You know, they can say, oh, I want a committed relationship. Wait, I don't want anything serious. And that's more of a human, in a way, example, but you get the point. It's two different frequencies. And when they're talking to you, they're giving you two different things. But that's a more maybe extreme example of how we put out different frequencies and why, if you look back over time of different things you've attracted, and you usually look back in your life and understand more of why things happen because you're at a different frequency now than you were maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 3 months ago, 3 minutes ago, and you understand, oh, I understand why it happened that way. It's always 2020. Not because of a human reason, because of frequency reason. You always can understand everything below your frequency, in a sense. You can see the whole thing very clearly because you're up looking down at it. You cannot understand it down looking up at it. That's why a lot of people have a hard time with their dreams. If they're really far, and they're always going to be different from your frequency, because if it was your frequency, they would be happening in your life right now. It's far from your frequency, and that's why it's not in your life. Because your body frequency is not the frequency of that dream, of what you saw. In a meditative state, in a dream state, your frequency is different. If it was not a different frequency, it would actually be here. So it's a different frequency. But when you start really looking at why different things come in, when you're trying to understand dreams, and in the beginning, this can be tricky for a lot of people because you're trying to look up at a frequency and understand it, but you don't have the galactic intelligence, the unified field intelligence yet to understand it until you get closer to that frequency. And even then you don't understand the whole thing. Until you really surpass that frequency, can you look back at it and say, oh, I see that. That's why you stop having this. Sometimes you have repetitive dreams. you eventually stop having those repetitive dreams because you hit a frequency beyond those dreams. You start dreaming something else. It takes on a different form. It takes on a different energetics for you. You surpass those, not just in your physical state. In the physical state, it's the same thing. Things go away because you surpass that frequency and you go into something else. Your body's always raising in frequency. Even human, if you're in your human form, you're raising in frequency. If you choose not to ascend your body, and it was your choice way before you came in and incarnated in not to ascend your body, you're going to suffer, a physical death before your ascension takes place. Those are kind of your options in a sense, but all that was decided ahead of time. I remember talking to one guy, and we were talking about ascension. He was really into his galactic ascension process at the time. And I said, well, everyone's going to ascend. And he said, well, my parents won't. And I was like, well, they might not ascend here. They might choose not to ascend their body here. They might choose to ascend their body in another space or not do body ascension and return back to the unified field. And then another soul is born, comes out of that, one for one in a sense, and then they will ascend their body. So you can kind of understand what is happening, what happens on the planet. That's why when you get back into the planetary stuff, you start to understand the planet astrology comes around again, and you start having all the upheavals on the earth. You start seeing all the things start changing again. I think 2020, it was 2020. I think it was, no, maybe it was 2018, 2017, 2018, had the same energetics as the Revolutionary War had. It was the exact same planetary alignment. I might not be exactly right on the year. Might have been 2017. But there was some point when it crossed and it was exactly the same. And you could see all the upheaval again in the collectives because it was triggering that stuff in the body that was triggered back in this, 1760s when the whole thing started in the first place with the Revolutionary War. All those things were triggered again, culminating with, the birth of the nation. So you have to really kind of look at where you are with astrology, where you are with all of it really, even the dream state, which I guess I touched on here too. I'm gonna write that down. I might do a video on that. Why we can't understand our dreams. Why we don't understand it because we're not in the frequency of the dream. And sometimes you start seeing something happen similar in your actual physical existence, and then you understand what the dream was trying to say. But that's because you reach the frequency of the dream. So, okay, that was a long preamble, and I'm gonna open up my chat for a minute. But I think that touched on quite a bit today, more than I thought I was gonna touch on. I'm still having a little bit of problem with my camera, so let me see. Oh, okay, messages from your past life. Now, I'm not sure if my chatter today is serious or not. I think in a way they are. Even if they say it jokingly, I do feel like there's something there for them or they wouldn't say it in the first place. We never say anything that's not exactly true. We might say it as a joke, but in a way you are always going to have a bleed over. Everything bleeds over. There's not a closed system. Everything is going to bleed over one way or the other. You're never going to have a system that does not bleed over. It can't, they don't exist in a vacuum. Everything is going to bleed over. That's why eventually your dream space does bleed over, the energetics. Your dream space, a lot of times people want to keep, it's a past life and they're separate. They're not separate. It's just different frequencies. Different frequencies, a different dimension. It's the same thing. It's just when we're asleep, we call it a dream. When we're awake, and you feel a past life or might see a past life, you call it, oh, that's more real. I really did that. Well, you do everything in your dreams say too. It's the same thing. They're just different. It's different frequencies, different dimensions occurring at the same time, but it bleeds over. You only get a past life. You either get drawn to look at them, which is another kind of awakening code for a lot of people. You get drawn to look at them because something is playing out now energetically that was similar to that experience. And because it's all happening at the same time, it's very easy for you to pop over one to the other. You can start to see the similarities of it. That's why it comes through. That might be why you get a remembrance of it. Not so much you get bogged down on what that whole thing was or what that whole thing is currently. It doesn't really matter. Human wants to get into the story of it. They want to attach to the story and they want to get all wrapped up in the story. It's not the story that makes a difference. It's the energetics playing out currently. You always want to bring it back to your present state and present moment. That's what's important with that. It's not about what happened before. It's about the current state. It's not about what happened 30 years ago. It's about what energetics is similar now. Why are you remembering it now? Sometimes we remember things, we reminisce on things because we're going to have a big shift and we're starting to clear out old memories in a sense. Starting to have certain things come through and then we kind of remember things from 30 years ago and then we reminisce and then it's gone. But normally in your higher consciousness, you only start reminiscing when you're gonna shift. You're clearing out old memories. You start remembering things and you kind of get down a rabbit hole of different maybe TV shows you used to watch. For me, it almost plays out as different TV shows I used to watch 30, 40 years ago. I'll start remembering things that kind of seem out of the blue. And it's kind of a fun thing to go down the rabbit hole a little bit with that and then realize you're just going through a shift. Or you're getting ready to shift. But you're clearing out some stuff, remembering stuff, closing out different sections, I think. I think it's all a longer energetics in a sense. You're sort of closing out certain things. So I think that's going to be it for me today. I think that was we covered a lot today. So, okay. Good luck with all that. Bye.